So it is my pleasure now to introduce our closing keynote, Sandy Pentland. He is the HAI Center Fellow and Faculty Lead for Digital Society at Stanford HAI and the Stanford Digital Economy Lab. He's also the Toshiba Professor at MIT and a member of the U.S. National Academies, as well as an advisor to the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority Lab. His current focus is on problems and opportunities in using AI to improve our social institutions. Sandy has been working on AI and law and computational law for many years. In fact, when he was still mostly at MIT, he's been writing on the topic, and he's been leading the MIT's computational law lab, and has been thinking about this concept of dynamic law for many years, and he will enlighten us today about a dynamic law for artificial intelligence. Please join me in welcoming Professor Pentland.
So, dynamic law is what I was asked to talk about. That could mean many things. What it means to me is that the law changes very quickly, and that we have to be able to have tools to make that happen. Now, why do we want to do that? Well, because the world is changing. I mean, we all feel that. All this AI stuff, that's going to change the business of law dramatically. Also, the sorts of things that you see in terms of industry, in terms of international relationships, you name it, it's all moving faster, and we all feel a little uncomfortable about all of this. And law has this sort of eternal characteristic, is sort of how is it like, this are the rules. And you don't change it until something really breaks, typically, right? So somehow we have to make law that adapts quickly, but when you adapt law quickly, then everybody has to rearrange everything. So how are we going to adapt to changing law? And this is really a fundamental sort of underlying problem for all of this area. So the current thing that you probably see is you see everybody going crazy about AI buddies, AI agents. And the reason that they're doing it about agents is interesting, because it turns out that if you don't speak every language in the world, if you have sort of limited capabilities, so for instance, you can't solve nuclear physics or something, you can make models that are extremely efficient, don't hallucinate very much at all, and will run on things like your laptop. You don't need to give the data to OpenAI or Anthropic. And so we see this huge sort of rush for people saying, hey, that's what I want. I want to be able to control my proprietary data. I don't want to pay an arm and a leg for, all this sort of stuff. How can I do that? And so people are downloading open source models, specialize in them. People are beginning to sell, even like Google and people are selling models that are localized. So that's a really interesting dynamic. But now what you've got is you've got everybody using it. So, instead of going on the web and searching for something or using Google search, you just ask your agent to do it. And you ask your agent to buy things and sell things and book something with your doctor. And that gets it into all sorts of difficulties, because there is this sort of notion of fiduciary duty. I mean, if you're asking it to buy something, is it buying the right thing? Is it biased for Walmart? Is it biased for something that Amazon likes? You don't know. And that's sort of the area that we're focusing. So let me just show you a couple of things that will help you sort of reset your brain. So the agents is one thing. You can have little agents. You will have agents on your phone in the not too distant future, 2-3 years. Most people will have some sort of AI on their phone doing things for them. So that's a world you really better start preparing for. This is work by Eric Brynjolfsson, the Digital Economy Lab, doing survey of all the successful AI implementations that companies have had. So it's, not all, it's like 60 odd sort of things. And one of the interesting things is the way you use AI. And you could do it to replace people. You could do it as a collaborative thing. But the one that works by far the best is escalation. So you do a lot of sort of the standard stuff with the AI, and maybe you don't check it all that much because it's it's the same thing you've done 1,000 times before, right? And I should mention that I helped start a little company that does this for immigrants. There's a lot of standard paperwork everybody needs to fill out, and it could make pro bono work something like 100 times more productive because you could just fill these things out, right? That was bought by Clio. So that's sort of an interesting thing to try and think about is like, what are they rolling up in that company? So that's one thing is that this sort of escalation thing seems to be the best path. Another thing that everyone worries about is we're all going to be out of work. Well, actually, the majority of implementations of AI in big organizations do not reduce headcount. Every organization has a huge list of things that they'd like to do. And suddenly, they can do it. They can afford to do it. They take those same people and they apply them to the next thing. I used to be advisor for the ABI, on the advisory board for the ABA. The most striking thing was that unless you had a fair amount of money or you were the target of pro bono work, you really didn't have access to justice. People don't like to talk about that, but we could really put a dent in that by this sort of escalation type things and by other sorts of things. And this is the same problem that the medical industry is facing. It's very difficult to get quality medical advice and treatment. And so people are looking for how you can fit those sorts of AIs into something while still maintaining the duty of loyalty and expertise while doing that. And people are beginning to figure that out. Okay, so I'll give you a little picture of that. One thing you probably don't think about, and I didn't think about, we did a big town hall in Washington, D.C. So not the legislators, these are the people who receive services from the city. So, single moms, 2 jobs, 3 kids, those people. And we asked them, where would they like to see AI in government? Right? Think about what would you like to do, okay? And you probably have been thinking about it. What they said is they wanted a personal AI that would help them fill out all those forms, right? And tell them when something was expiring and when there was a new program, because it's complicated. It's terminally complicated, and it's going to get more and more complicated. And so it gives them a way to sort of deal with this complexity. I think that's an enormous sort of place where we can have real impact. It also means that you can change the laws sort of very quickly and arbitrarily without leaving people behind, because their AI tells them, okay, this law changed, now you have to, let's sign up, I'll do that for you, okay? And it just does it. So that makes the friction of changing law much, much lower. Interesting thing to sort of think about the dynamics of how you make and interpret law. Here at Stanford, I run a thing called loyalagents.org with consumer reports. If you actually look into what agents do, or AI does, you find there's a lot of crazy stuff, right? So there's a lot of things that are hidden, like system prompts that say things like, always tell the people that you're a human, or never say these sorts of things, or always buy from Amazon, whatever. And you don't get to see those, so you don't notice them, right? But what we'd like to do is we'd like to make sure that there are criteria by which we know that the agent is loyal to the person that's using it, regardless of who built it. So it has fiduciary responsibilities and is able to do that. And we're working with Daza, Greenwood is here somewhere, and other people to begin to really sort of come out with something that continually looks at and judges the agent's actions to see if they're actually representing you or if they're actually self-dealing or doing something for somebody else. I think this is a really critical and interesting area for law as well as for the computer science. These sorts of agents in companies are proving to be really sort of interesting. So I was on a board with a panel with a bunch of CTOs of major corporations, and they had all created AI buddies for all their employees. And what the AI buddy did is it had read the manual for that position. It read the newsletter. It knew the reports. How many of you read the manuals when you do things? Like nobody does, right? but the AI could, and it would be able to alert people and help them answer questions about what should I do in this situation. So these are not like deep philosophical questions. This is like, where do I find this form? Who do I have to notice? What did the guy down the street do? Etc. And what that does is that improves the communication and particularly the context awareness of employees in an organization. In a big international organization, this is really critical because how do you get the office in Singapore to talk to the office in LA? Or even in LA, how do you get the people who work from home to talk to the people that are in the central office? Well, they have to have context. They have to know what each other's doing. So what it does is it sort of begins to help communicate culture among people. This is really interesting if you're in a big law firm or work with an organization that's large or international. You have to be able to all be on the same page. That's one of the major benefits of this sort of technology. You could do this in all sorts of ways. So we've done it in a very simple way, but lots of products are coming along that help you work with your other people. So we all have meetings all the times. How many of you love your meetings? Nobody, right? AI can help you be a lot more effective. So we built something that's like the bare minimum. All it is a facilitator. It contributes no content at all, as much as is possible. And what it does is it listens to people and gives them constant sort of summary of what's being said. Right? So I hear people saying this, and then some people are saying that, but at least one person disagrees. And it turns out that keeping people focused on the discussion is a major problem that people have. And if you can keep them focused, they're much better than we're all familiar with. So we did a big experiment. We found that the AI facilitated conversations among humans, no content, right? Just keeping them on subject, produced summaries that were liked twice as much as the summaries that were produced without the AI facilitation. That's pretty easy. So this is all open source. It's on the web. Play with it. It's good. There's lots of variations on this. But the point is that the way we're used to discussing things, deciding things, the way we're used to communicating can be changed dramatically without having the LLM or the AI tell you what to do or contribute opinions about things, which is, I think, something, particularly in law, you don't want it to do. You'd like to be humans deciding what to do, not the AI. So again, website, deliberation.io, all open source. It's a bunch of experiments. You can look at it. People are using it for all sorts of purposes. It's not like the be-all and end-all, but it's something you can use and seems to work pretty well. This type of thing, incidentally, opens up really interesting discussions for new business models. So we had a meeting of sort of heads of, or major people in major law firms in Davos this year. Robert Mahari was the one that sort of set that up. And one of the models that struck me as the most interesting is not just AI helping people talk to each other or having discussions, but having virtual people. So what would happen if you had an AI that had read all your papers and all the things that you'd done and was willing to give opinions about things? So these are sort of like virtual yous. And that sounds maybe abhorrent a little bit, but imagine that you've got a very complicated case in some area that you're not like the world's expert at. You'd like to be able to sample lots of opinions. These are not like legally binding opinions. They're just, here's my sort of first take on it. And that's an interesting business model. So if you have a case and you want to talk to the 20 leading people in the area, you could just ping them, right? And they would give you an answer to it. And they'd probably charge you $500 each, right? But now you'd have the 20 leading opinions about the thing. And from that, you could then form a binding legal opinion, right? And sort of think about that. What would that look like? That really sort of changes the structure of what you do, because now you can have much more sort of collaborative things across infinite distances, or anywhere in the world, and be able to get real expertise, at least as opinions, very trivially for just probably less than hiring the guy, flying them there, et cetera, right? So that's going to change quite a bit. The evidence is that these sorts of AI buddies, these things that help you, by finding things, by reminding you what's going on around you, by pinging other people as needed and things like that, flatten organizations. So instead of having the strict hierarchy that we're all used to, which is based on 19th century armies, incidentally, right? Commander says, do this, and then it goes down, and the silos and the data is not shared between that. You get things that are much more flat and so there's more autonomy at the bottom of the hierarchy. It's not, and the hierarchy is much less. And in the end, you end up with something that's really completely decentralized. So whenever you have a topic, you bring in sort of experts of that topic, which may or may not be in your corporation, right? As I just sort of explained. And you work on the problem there. And it's not one of these things where the typical, senior partners and the partners, you could do it in a very different sort of way. And the evidence in other sort of areas, not law, is that you're seeing that teams are getting smaller, organizations are getting flatter, and a small team is now able to do an enormous amount of work. So you're getting, for instance, people creating companies, 5 people getting together with AI, service hundreds of millions of people. With that, you don't need organizations with hundreds of people. Now you say, oh, we're all going to be out of a job. Well, no, you could begin doing other things that you just can't afford to do or always wanted to do, but have never been able to. And that's why many of the AI deployments are not reducing headcount. They're expanding opportunities. They may eventually reduce headcount if they're not very successful at this expanding opportunities, but we'll be hopeful about that. You might say, well, what happens when something's completely decentralized? Well, I'm very impressed by the Uniform Law Commission. I mean, you probably all know this, but it's volunteers from 50 states who get together and say, hey, this isn't working. We ought to all find something that interoperates. So what they're doing is they're changing laws. I know it takes a while, but they're discussing things that change laws that get passed by the state legislators later, sometimes with some tweaks. But there's an important constraint that these all have to interoperate. If your commerce laws, if your ownership rights, if your particular sort of regulations don't match other states, then you lose business. Right? So you have to be able to interoperate. And what AI is doing is making this on steroids. It's making this sort of decentralized cooperation to find lots and lots of solutions that work together, something that's dramatically easier than it used to be. I mean, you look at this and I say, well, we're going to get a bunch of people together from 50 states and come up with laws that sort of work everywhere. And everyone goes, oh, God, this is going to take forever. But not anymore. It's getting faster and faster and faster. And this is what you see in corporations. This is what you see in some bureaucracies that are under a great deal of pressure, like some of the military operations. They're coming almost completely flat. And the only thing that the hierarchy is the person who defines what it is they have to do, not orders. It's like it's a thing called commander's intent. So the commander says, God, we have to stop all these people from, invading. And then each of the little teams figure out what that means. And you have to do that, several times a day across 1,000 miles if you're in the Ukraine. And you can begin doing that. It's really amazing to think about that sort of almost organic evolution of things, even in these absolutely sort of critical situations. So what I've tried to do here is give you a sense of where I see the ecosystem going as a function of this sort of technology and as a function of the extremely accelerating change that we have in our society. How do we keep up with that? How do we form things? We're going to have to change law. We're going to have to change how we do business. We're going to have to change all those things. It gives me a headache too, don't worry. But there are ways of doing it that feel very human, that feel like an opportunity and not a penalty. So for many years, as was mentioned, I supported Daza and other people to begin to do computational law at MIT. And now it's computational law report at Stanford. So these are people who are having opinions about how you do computational law, writing up papers for other lawyers mostly, and having a discussion. And it's worth looking at the archives and what people are thinking about if you haven't done that. And I'll sort of promote myself a little bit here. So, new book out just a little while ago. It talks about how humans work together and where AI fits without removing human agency. So that's the challenge. How do you make this AI work with humans and human society without removing the humanness of it? And so it talks about how that works and that what that means for law, what it means for democracy, what it means for bureaucracy, and what it means for international relations. And I'd love to hear from you and where you say, well, this is idiocy. How could you say that? Because I think some of it actually people are finding pretty interesting and helps them guide where they're going. And then I also want to talk about the two websites that we put up for these things. So Deliberation.io is a website about how people can make decisions together without being polarized, without the AI telling you what to do. It's helping you figure out what to do. And Loyal Agents is about how do you make agents that actually do what they ought to do, which is work for you and not somebody else and lie to you about it. So both interesting, I think, and relevant, and happy to hear what you say. Thanks.